ratcheting up tribal and inter-island conflict, amplifying grievances between the native peoples. The canoe raids, in which only a handful of heavily armed Spanish or Portuguese participated, led to heavy losses among the indigenous population. For 15 months, the Iberians attacked and killed each other. Each aggression prompted a response. The miniature sieges, raids and counter-raids seemed interminable. Urdaneta's diary becomes a blur. On many other occasions that I haven't set down here, we clashed with one another. There were dead and wounded Christians, Castilians as well as Portuguese, and many Indians. If I had to record all the encounters that we had with the Portuguese and their Indian allies, and the destruction that we wreaked on the settlements of their allies, there would never be an end to it. Gunfire, bloodshed, and double-crossing. The fighting dragged in all the clove-bearing islands, the settlements on Gilolo, and other outlying communities whose inhabitants chose their allegiances variably. Urdaneta traveled widely, conducting canoe raids and defensive operations. Sometimes full-scale battles broke out, in which he routinely claimed Spanish victories. Particularly fierce was the contest for the clove-bearing island of Makion, which had been a tributary of the King of Tidore. The Portuguese had sacked the island. Its ruler, Quichil Una, appealed to Tidore. Aware that the Portuguese intended to attack the island again, the Castilians mounted a defense. 2 small fleets of canoes met off the coast of Gilolo. Because there was a great rumor that the Portuguese had a large fleet to destroy Quichil Una, we Castilians found ourselves in a fierce encounter at sea, together with the men of Gilolo, against the Portuguese and the people of Tonati. We had 19 proas, the enemy 37. We clashed 2 leagues off Gilolo. We began to bombard each other in such a way that the engagement lasted more than 4 hours. With the smoke from powder of artillery and handguns, we couldn't see what was going on, nor did the Indians stop hurling great missiles, so many that they fell as thick as rain. There was a proa that carried 40 archers of these missiles. Each Indian who fired these carried 100 of them, and the fighting didn't stop until both sides had used up all their ammunition. We wanted to grapple with the enemy hand to hand, but they fled and we pursued them for a long time. Then we turned back to recover the missiles that both sides had fired, and so we returned to Gilolo highly triumphant. There were many dead and wounded among the Indians on both sides, and also wounded Castilians and Portuguese. In this episode, Quichil de Roebes, the governor of the island of Tonati, the bravest and most feared among all the Indians, was wounded. He was wounded 3 times, by a gun, an arrow, and a blow on the head. Despite Urdaneta's claims of successive Spanish triumphs, the situation remained a stalemate. The Portuguese could not dislodge their rivals. The Spanish could never win. And then sometime around the 20th of March 1528, a new twist. The Spanish and supporting tribesmen were attacking a dissident settlement on Gilolo when they spied a European ship approaching from the north. We fired 2 musket shots to see if they responded, but because it was nearly nightfall, they turned back out to sea. From this they deduced that the vessel was Spanish. If Portuguese, the ship would probably have proceeded, as the wind to Tonati was favorable. The next day, the guess proved correct. The ship was called the Florida, commanded by one Alvaro de Saavedra Cerón. It had come not via the strait, but from Mexico, at the command of the governor, Hernán Cortés. Behind this lay an astonishing chain of events that went back 2 years. Chapter 9. The Voyage of the Florida, 1526 to 36. Spain, the summer of 1526. While the Spanish and the Portuguese are trying to throttle each other on the other side of the world, and Loais's fleet is being scattered, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, is enjoying a long and rapturous honeymoon in the Alhambra in Granada. In its fragile Islamic pavilions, with their exquisite abstract geometry, among mirrored pools, the scent of flowers and the gentle splash of water from fountains, and the mouths of lions, he is getting to know his bride. He has just married a Portuguese princess, Isabel, sister of King John III of Portugal. It is a political union. They are cousins. This is the dynastic bride swap. His sister Catherine has been married off to Isabel's brother, John III. But for Charles and Isabel, it soon becomes a marriage of love. In time, workmen will be inserting a coffered wooden ceiling into one of the pavilions, inset cedar wood squares, carrying the repeating legend, Plus Ultra, and between, the initials K. Carolus, Charles, and Y, Isabel, linked by a flower. At the same time, for Charles, the vision of an ever-expanding empire remained at the front of mind, and he was anxious to get news of Loisa's fleet and the fate of the Trinidad. Given the Portuguese marriage alliance, this was not a tactful moment to be seen launching a new fleet from Spain. There was now an alternative: dispatch ships from the shores of Mexico, New Spain, under the auspices of its Captain General, Hernán Cortés, conqueror of the Aztec Empire. In 1521, Cortés's men had reached the Pacific shore. The possibility of forging a route to the Spice Islands from the Americas was already under consideration. Cortés had started shipbuilding on the west coast with this aim. On the 20th of June, 1526, Charles wrote to Cortés, ordering him to mount an expedition, with the repeated mantra, "To the Moluccas and other lands where spices are found within our demarcation." Just as these orders arrived, Cortés received encouragement from another quarter. In the storm that had hit Loaisa's expedition when it entered the Pacific, 3 ships vanished and were assumed lost. However, one, the tiny pinnace, the Santiago, was still afloat but in desperate straits. It had almost no food. Its provisions had been stored on Loaisa's flagship. The Santiago had just 8 barrels of water, 400 pounds of biscuits reduced to dust, and 50 men. There was no possibility of crossing the Pacific alive. Food was rationed to 2.5 ounces of biscuit a day. The captain then took a bold decision: attempt to sail up the west coast of the Americas in the hope of reaching New Spain. He aimed to keep the crew alive by catching fish along the way. As they worked their way up the coast, they saw signs of habitation. On the 12th of July, they caught sight of people and the curl of smoke, but no contact could be made. By the 25th of July, after 55 days of lone sailing, the crew was starving. There was nothing for it but to get someone to risk his life trying to obtain food from an unknown indigenous people. The individual was to take with him scissors, mirrors, and other things wherewith to barter with the Indians, so that they might not kill and eat him. Because they had no ship's boat, the only expedient was to try to get a man through the surf in a large box attached to a rope, so that if the box capsized, there was a chance the hapless volunteer might be hauled back alive. The chaplain, Juan de Arriazaga, offered to go. Commending himself to God, he got into the box in his shirt and drawers with a sword. Halfway to the shore, the box upturned. The floundering chaplain was rescued half dead from the water by 5 Indians. Their response was a total surprise. They salvaged his possessions, placed the objects beside him, and threw themselves on the ground. He wanted to give them some of the things, but they would not take them, and they made signs for him to come with them. He accompanied them, sword in hand, while one of the Indians carried the hamper of trade goods on his head. Arriazaga's adventure unfolded like a dream.